In this brief recording, I would like to share with you my own personal thoughts about could sex be a prayer? Interestingly, about 3 years, maybe 4 years ago, I was invited by a good friend, Alison Knox, to host a healing day in her husband's studio in Nottingham. And it was a wonderful day, and the delegates who came, I think, got more than they bargained for. Because just after the meditation, where we brought in the Magdalena energy, one of the delegates, whom I had my suspicions about, actually asked a direct question. And the question was, what is prayer? Well, at that moment, I wanted to give the Catholic Church's definition of prayer that I was familiar with from the Penny Catechism, which was part of my formative training, and I'd learned that definition word perfect from being a young child from the age of 5. And in the Penny Catechism it says, prayer is a raising up of the mind and heart before God, to do good things and avoid sin. I was about to share that when suddenly my mouth froze and an energy took over, and out of my mouth came the words, good sex. Well, you can imagine how I felt. And you can imagine how the 12 delegates felt, who fell over laughing, but I think their laughter was more possibly shock at me for saying such a thing. Because at the time, on the circuit, I was known as the Barefoot Angel Man, and that conjured up lots of different images. But can you imagine how they reacted to the statement, prayer is good sex? But what was so meaningful and yet so beautiful was that from that loaded statement came a very beautiful yet simple definition, that prayer isn't just about sex. Prayer is not lust sex, sex that we engage in for just pure selfless pleasure. I believe that loving sex is a prayer, because when two people come together, whether of the same sex or of the opposite sex, who have a great capacity to love each other, and when they cement that love in a loving act and demonstrate their heart's desires with each other, the two become one in that loving embrace. So why can't we say that loving sex is a prayer? Because I believe that where there is love in that sexual intimacy, with two souls entwined in the presence of God, then why shouldn't that be divine love? So sex, loving sex, is a prayer, a beautiful prayer. And where there is love, there is light. And where there is light, there is love, there is God. Because God is love. And I also believe that the angels, the messengers of God, are messengers of love. They come with loving instructions to guide us, and when we engage in that loving embrace with our beloved, our soulmate,
and there is just complete ecstasy. I believe in that moment of spiritual intimacy
through that loving sexual act, angels are present. Because God is present. Because the act itself epitomizes a loving, selfless God who wants his children, her children, to experience a compassionate, loving, tender embrace of God when two hearts are entwined in that loving act. When I shared this with the group, they looked at me bemused. And yet I know that the person who asked the question had issues. And after the coffee break, I got a strong feeling in my heart that this person had several entities that was creating a disruptive influence in their personal life. In fact, it came out that this person had many relationships with men and had become a lap dancer. And as a lap dancer, she was there to excite men, but had a great mistrust of them. And in a way, she was abusing herself. She was reenacting many roles, but the greatest role was that of disempowering herself and making herself cheap, when in fact she should have been celebrating her femininity instead of using it as a weapon to disempower herself and lead many astray. And that person kept in touch with us and thanked me for the explanation given. But my heart asked her permission, could I pray with her? And I just placed my hand on her heart. And in the name of Christ, I asked for God's love to touch her and turn around lustful sex into loving sex and empower her, take responsibility for her life. And I do believe that now she and her partner have been able to resolve a lot of painful issues and are now engaged in loving sex, which is a prayer. So what turned out as being a direct challenge by the entities of God, the entities against God, not of God, the entities or the dark side that tried to stop a beautiful day from unfolding, was turned on its head because the Spirit of God used that person to say it as it was, and the responses were from God. That sex, if engaged in a loving act with two people who love and respect each other, then that for me is the greatest prayer. Because it's a raising up of the mind, the heart and the soul, entwined in that loving embrace, celebrating one's divinity through that physical act. So we must celebrate sex. I know within my own life, my church portrayed a negative influence, particularly as a young monk. When we had impure thoughts, we would have to whip ourselves or have a cold shower. And many times a lot of us would freeze to death because we were young and virile men. It's a shame that we didn't know then what we know today. So let us conclude by saying, when you embrace your partner in loving intimacy, know that you are engaging in the prayers of the heart, engaging with the mystical heart of God.